Welcome back to the wood shop, guys. Today I'm going to be talking about mortises in the wood shop, and I'm going to show you a handful of options to make those mortises, from the budget friendly to the budget buster. Stick with us. So up until recently, anytime I needed to make mortises, generally the way I done it, I would use the drill press with a Forstner bit in it, hog out all the material, take a chisel, and clean it up, and it's worked fine up till now, although it is kind of a long process, and I'll show you how we done that. So you saw how I finished that up, and I will say that is way too wide of a mortise for this width of a board. Just wanted to show you the process of it and make it a little easier to see. But you can see I had to drill that in there 4 times with the mortise, or excuse me, the Forstner bit, and then come back with a chisel and clean it up. And you can see it's not bad. And that took me probably, not counting what I didn't show on camera, that's probably a good 10 to 15 minutes getting everything cleaned up the way I wanted it. So it's kind of a long process. So the way I do my mortises, generally I make the mortise first, and then I'll size the tenon to match. Seems to me like it's a little bit easier that way. But the first real option I wanted to show you, I've recently invested a little bit more money into the shop for some mortising options. And the first least expensive one that I've recently invested in, now this is not my idea. I watched a guy named Mike Farrington. If you've not seen him on YouTube, go check him out. He's got a great channel. But he actually recommended these bits called end mills. And you can find these fairly cheap. And as with the rest of these products, I'll leave a link to these in the description. But you can chuck this up in your drill press. And I think for the money, this is one of the easiest ways of doing them. Let me show you how that works. Now, if you'll notice, this bit is completely flat on the bottom, which is great for making a flat bottom mortise. However, that does not have a center point, and so a lot of times it's hard to distinguish where it's going to land on your layout lines. So before you go using this on a finished piece, you might want to do some scrap pieces, just some test cuts, just to make sure it's going to fall where you need it to. And before I forget to mention it, today I'm just using some scrap 2x material, just kind of showing you the process of everything. Now the great thing with this type of mortise, you can actually use a chisel to square this up if you want, or you can actually take the tenon and just make it round, and I find that a lot easier in my opinion. Also with those type bits, man, they're super sharp. You can see how clean a cut that is. It's straight. You don't have to worry about it. And unlike a mortiser, you don't have to really have anything to hold it down other than your hand because it doesn't have the same type of tension. So that's a great option. Now, I will say too that I kind of stayed away from the edge. I have found when I make these mortises, closer I get to the edge, have some issues, so I decided to go back a little farther. But it'll get the point across today, especially this being pine. I just wanted to use something scrap. Either way, let's go over to the table saw and make that tenon. So one thing I like using when it comes to layout and figuring out the depth of your mortise, that kind of stuff, is this little device from Craig. It actually can turn into a combination square. Several different things you can move this around on and you actually get 45 degrees out of it. But it's pretty handy for a depth measurement. Loosen it up, let it sit flush, and just tighten down. You don't have to sit and worry about trying to measure. You got your instant depth. And then you can use that to lay out your marks on your workpiece. So just to make it a little easier, I just took a handsaw and cut the ends of it off here. Just very simple to do, but the main part we're worried about is here, what's going to be the tenon. And as with anything, you want to sneak up on the fit of this thing. Just slightly raise your blade a little at a time until you get the perfect fit. Now, anytime you're going to make this type of cut, if you're going to cut all the way through, you don't want to have this right up against your fence while also using the miter gauge. But we're not going all the way through with this, so no worries there. We're going to set this thing up and get our cuts started. Normally I could take dado blades, set them up a little wider. Of course, it's a time-consuming process. I just don't really want to do that right now, so we're just going to use the individual blade and keep going back and forth. It won't take long at all. But let me show you my process. Okay, so the next thing I got to show you, next to the last actually, this actually is an attachment, a mortising attachment for your drill press. A knockoff brand on Amazon, and really researching these things, I couldn't really find a lot of these that were name brand. I did find a Grizzly one, but the Grizzly one was nearly identical to this thing, and so I thought I'd take a chance, save a few bucks, and see if this one would work out like I wanted it to. So now this one is kind of a universal kit. It's made to fit lots of different drill presses. Now they do offer the sizes that you should check for on your drill press just to make sure this thing will work. And it comes with 4 adapters. Now some of these will slide into one another to make it fit the appropriate drill press shank right here. Luckily, mine didn't have to have any of these. The main attachment here fit on it pretty well, although this was a little tight, so I took it to the drum sander and sanded in here just ever so slightly to get it just to where it would slide on here easily. But once we tighten it up, it fits good and snug. This one comes with your fence piece, along with this attachment where you can set it right on top. I think more than anything that would actually work if you're not using the table like I am. But where I'm using the table, I'm not using this. So as you can see here, I've actually took just a scrap 2x, drilled some holes out here, and this thing will actually sit down on those bolts attach some knobs, tighten it down, and be good and secure. So this does come with 4 different size hollow mortising chisels and the drill bit or the auger that goes in the center. This particular one comes with a 1/4 inch, 3/8, 1/2 inch, and a 5/8. 5/8 is a little large for a lot of things. Probably won't be using that one a lot. It also comes with all the hardware, the little hand screw knobs here that's going to make it a lot easier about tightening everything up and not having to worry about finding a wrench or something like that. And finally, it has the hold down with the bar that attaches it to the back of this fence that should hold your workpiece down to the table. Before you get too far into it, I just want to say this does take a lot of pressure to push it down, as well as to raise it back up out of the wood, because when your chisel is in the wood, it's a very tight fit, and so pulling it back up is a decent amount of pressure. And I've actually had it to pull your chuck off the end of the drill, so make sure that thing's on there good and tight. And so the first thing I want to do, as I said, I've got this board with this, we're going to call it a fence attached here. I've got a couple of knobs that's going to make it a lot easier about taking on and off. The washer down. And just leave it kind of loose at the moment. This rod is going to go back here. So I've lowered the table down to accommodate for this piece as well as the work piece. Now I do want to upgrade this a little later on to where it's just not a nut and a bolt. I want to have something sort of like a wing nut or something to make it a little easier about installing. Anyway, pull this up here and you can see it's a snug fit, but it's not so tight that you can't get it on there. And then you'll take 2 wrenches. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is go ahead and install our chiseling bit that's included. And I want to say you want to make sure these are pretty sharp. Now I didn't go through a heck of a lot of sharpening. I think it'll get us by, at least for the point of this video. I've got it pretty flat. And the way I like installing these, and the way a lot of people do, make sure your chuck is opened up plenty enough. Hold it by the bottom. Push it all the way up until it seats. Drop it down just a hair. Go ahead and lock the chuck down. Once you have the chuck tightened up, go ahead and come down here to your chisel. Raise it all the way up that little bit of a measurement there. Go ahead and cinch that down. And they do make centering jigs for this. Basically, it's just a dowel that sticks in your chuck. But if you don't have one of those, one way you can test to make sure it's pretty well centered. Turn it on. If you don't hear any kind of squeaking, you should be pretty good. And it's always a good idea to go ahead and put some type of a dry lube in here. And I use this particular one, but you can use any of those. Go ahead and spray a little on the bit itself. And I actually like to put just a bit of wax on the outside of the chisel. It kind of helps everything move a little better. The way I like to square up this chisel to the fence we're using is to go ahead and remove the hold down piece, just because it gets in the way. Pull down the drill press arm to where this is locked in place. Set a square against your fence. Of course, you may have to make minor adjustments once you're actually cutting the piece. loosen the chisel piece up and rotate it where everything's in square, and lock it down. With that, we're ready to try the first cut, so let's go ahead and get started. And as with the previous one, I've got layout marks that match with the mortise here. I'll just lay them down. So for the final thing I wanted to show you today, I finally invested in a dedicated mortiser. I went back and forth on the brands I wanted to choose from. Of course, budget played a lot of role in that. I actually looked at a Grizzly, a Win, and also this Vevor. Ultimately, I landed on the Vevor. Price was one thing, features were another. Now, this is almost a clone of a Rikon, or at least it was when I ordered it. It was white and blue, that kind of stuff. When I got it, it was gray. I actually had some shipping issues where this thing was laying in the shipping crate, as well as, being beside this. The motor had rolled around, and this capacitor cover had actually came off. The capacitor was laying over to the side. Luckily, it didn't break. But as you can see, there are some shoddy looking scratches all over this thing. It's been beat up. Luckily, it works good. It's quiet. It does everything I need it to. And so ultimately, that's the main goal. And I do believe that a lot of these are made in the same factories, at least the base part of this, because it is solid cast iron. Now, if you decide you want this one or any other one, I imagine you're going to have some help, because this thing is ultra heavy. I want to say it's about 100 pounds. And that wasn't even counting the motor on top of here. Before I forget to mention, a lot of these will tell you certain RPMs to run these bits at, and so 1,000 to 1,500 RPMs. This one kind of contradicts itself. If you look down here on the base of this machine, it's saying 1,400 RPM. Up here on the actual motor, it says 1,650, so who knows on that one. I actually set the drill press for that attachment at 1,440. It's one of the options. But let me get you down here and show you big reasons I chose this machine. So the way this one works, I don't have it actually bolted down here. You can see that. But when I do, tighten this up against your workpiece, it clamps it in place. Instead of being like the other that holds it down. Now, who's to say which is better? I have had pieces that would come up maybe when I didn't have this as tight as it should have been. So that's one downfall you can look at. Another option I really liked on this one, this table moves. Here's a lock that'll lock it in place, that unlocks it and allows You can grab this knob and you can move it in and out with relative ease, to be honest. It's actually quite smooth. And then the other option I liked about it, and you can see this big hand wheel out here, and this one is actually pretty much 1-to-1 in the way you turn it. So when you turn here, slides the table left and right. And for me, that was a big seller. I could see that being very useful. Instead of trying to having to move the workpiece all the time, you just move the table. And I will say, whenever you are using this one, get it set where you want here, and definitely lock that down, because if not, I don't know if you can pick that up, but there's a little bit of slop if you don't have that locked down. So you definitely don't want that. And of course, we're going to do the same thing after using the dedicated mortiser. So guys, that's going to bring us to the end of this video. You just seen several great ways of making mortises that's going to step up your joinery game, and that's a big plus in my book. I appreciate you watching. Hopefully you learned something from this. Maybe it turned you on to something you're interested in buying, mortiser, maybe even a mortising attachment, or even those little bits we were showing you. Either way, appreciate you watching. Like, share, subscribe if you would, and we'll see you on the next one.